Thank you all for coming. It's so good to see so many familiar faces and to make new friends. May I invite down Ruth Messenger, Dr. Michal Raucher, and Rob and Jeremy to join us in this conversation. I'll just do a quick intro of myself while we're waiting for them to come down. As you heard, my name is Daphne Lazar Price. I'm the Executive Director of the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, where our mission is to advocate for women within the framework of halakha, Jewish law, to create a vibrant and equitable Orthodox community. When it comes to abortion access, our position has always been that every woman should be able to make a decision about her own body and her own medical care without stigma or influence from others and retaining human dignity. I also want to give a shout out to Rebecca, who's here from Lilith Magazine. Lilith Magazine is a frankly feminist journal, which, as you heard at the start, you're all welcome to subscribe to. And without further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Michal Raucher, who is who's a scholar and an academic. Ruth Messenger, who is a former New York City Council member, also the former head of AJWS, and Rob and Jeremy Lyons and Rob Lyons and Jeremy Workman, thank you, I'm sorry, who produced Final Vote. Let me start with a question. I guess I'll start with Michal. This was very Jewish, not so much Jewish law, and which I found interesting, considering that everything that I do comes from a lens of Jewish law. But I've also had a long career in political activism and public advocacy at the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. Michal, what makes this so Jewish, and without looking at Jewish law?
Yeah, so thanks, Daphne, and thanks to everybody for being here. Thanks to JCC. It's great to be on a panel with everybody. What makes this Jewish? So I'm an anthropologist of Jews, so I actually think Jewish people make this Jewish, and the fact that there are a lot of Jews who have, as I said in the film, historically advocated for reproductive health, rights, and justice, the fact that Jews now are very active in the debate, in the discussion, and the activism, I think all of that makes it Jewish. I think so the lawsuits themselves, there are 5 lawsuits in various states, Missouri, Indiana, Kentucky, Florida. I forgot one, there's a 5th one. But they all actually use a lot of Jewish legal language, which I think is really actually limiting. The Jewish legal language, even as Jeremy Wieder, Rabbi Wieder was outlining, is more limiting than we'd like it to be in terms of reproductive rights. It actually sets a lot more limits. So I'm happy to not have the Jewish law piece. And I think the fact that Jews are so involved in this case as a matter of kind of cultural, ethnic, even religious identity that isn't defined by law, I think that is really Jewish.
Thank you. Ruth, you have a very long, illustrious career in public life. And I know that you spoke to moral courage. Is your microphone working?
I think it's on.
Okay. You and I talked a little bit before this about moral courage and what it means to demonstrate moral courage. Can you spend another minute about that as somebody who's been in the trenches as it relates to this topic, others who you've seen in the field who really, need to have their stories told?
Yeah, first of all, let me say a couple of general things. First of all, I'm glad you're here, and I think that the amazing thing about these 2 films, which are recent films, but which are about, in terms of Under God, really about the last year, and in terms of Deciding Vote about something that happened 50 years ago, is that they have amazing relevance to today, where on reproductive rights for sure, and by the way, on some other issues, the matter is coming again and again before state legislatures, and by the way, now also school boards, believe it or not, where what's needed is people who will use their own sets of values, whether those are religiously or secularly determined, to stand up against waves of prejudice. And I'm in love with the Deciding Vote because Jeremy and Rob took a story that I've been telling for years, and people sort of thought I was out of my mind. I usually would introduce it, and the second picture you saw of me is me teaching it to Jamie Allen Black is here, the founder of Illuminate, and the picture was me teaching one of the many cohorts in Illuminate about the importance of moral courage. But for years, and I'm afraid still until the film becomes a little more famous, I introduce it by saying, have you ever heard of George Michael's, not the singer? But I think for me, it's actually the ultimate test for all of us, is whether we are willing to speak truth to power and take risks. But it's very few places is it as dramatic as with elected officials, who, by the way, and I'm not going to deal with this now, but there's a history in America of political theory as to whether or not the job of an elected official is to vote what her constituents want or what her conscience dictates. Edmund Burke, who is a conservative political theorist, is on the side of voting your conscience and not your constituency. And moral courage is what it takes. The story of Assemblyman Michaels is amazing. By the way, the movie never says this, but James Michael is a rabbi.
Yes.
And it's just it's a story that needs to be told. And I would just ask, if I can ask the audience one question, is like, who can you think of in the last year who put a political career on the line to take a position of moral courage? Yeah, right. But we didn't talk about it that way. It doesn't surprise me that this audience knows that. But Liz Cheney is the most dramatic example in our recent lifetime. And by the way, literally word for word, she said what Assemblyman Michaels said. She said, I'm going to lose my seat, but I'm going to stand up for America becoming not a fascist country.
Deep breaths. Gentlemen, you produced a phenomenal film that told a story that has almost long been forgotten. Can you spend some time telling us how you discovered the story, what moved you to produce this, what you learned along the way, and something else that you want for the crowd to take home?
Well, sure, yeah. The story came to us through our executive producer, Jerome Steger, who's here as well in the middle here. We want to call him out. It was remarkable when he came to us, long before the Dobbs decision. We've been working on this for many years, and he came into our office and showed us this grainy YouTube video of the speech that just blew us away. And we were not familiar with the story, and anyone we knew was not familiar with the story. And it had been totally forgotten over the 50 years of, Roe stood. People just forgot about this story. But Daron had remembered it and brought it to our attention, and it was really, he was the driving force in making this happen and has supported us throughout the whole process. And it just, as we did the research and we started watching the debates on the floor of the assembly, it just, and then after the Dobbs decision, we snapped right back to this moment in time. And it was just, it blew us away. We'd never seen an example like this, and there's so few examples like this in modern times, and we just have a hunger for it and an interest in politics in that way. And so, I don't know if you want to add to that. But,
yeah, I mean, just what Rob said. I mean, Daron came to us in 2019, so this was before the pandemic, and we were going to make the movie in 2019, and then the pandemic hit, and we had all this extra time, so it allowed Rob and I to really immerse ourselves and to meet the family of George Michaels. When we had first started the film, I think we had even thought, also with our executive producer here, that maybe it would just be one of those films where you just see the archive. But as we got to know the family, and as Ruth mentioned, Jim, who's this incredible son of George Michaels, who's now a rabbi, and he's retired now, but we got to meet the family, and they were so interesting, and we saw the impact that this story had on the family, and it became that much more sort of real, and in a weird way, the slow process of us making it allowed us to really immerse ourselves into the story more and probably make it better. So that really ended up working out. By the way, this is my second film to play at this JCC, so thank you. So I'm just very proud of that. I had a film play here a couple of years ago called The World Before Your Feet, which is about a guy walking every street of New York City, and we were here with Jesse Eisenberg and Annette Insdorf moderated.
Cool.
I just want to say something for those few West Siders who are almost as old as I am. In the legislative debate, Franz Leichter, who was the Senate sponsor, is identified, and Constance Cook, who was an amazing legislator in her own right. But the other legislator who talks, the one who talks about the number of women whose lives were at risk, that's Al Blumenthal, who was a member of the State Assembly representing the west side of Manhattan for years, and who retired earlier than he wanted to, not for quite the same reason, but because he was under a totally unfair corruption attack, and he thought it would destroy his family for him to stay in office.
A lot of pressure. Michal. Sorry. By the way, I apologize. I keep
First
calling you
name
Michal.
is fine.
Okay, fine.
We
Thank you.
know each other.
We go way back. I know that you've done a lot more thought and research in this topic. What's one thing that you want to share with the audience that didn't make it into the film?
Well, it's sort of obvious through Ellie's story, who, by the way, Ellie and I go way back. We were in college together at JTS. So I've known that she's a wonderful, wonderful human being, and I'm so glad that her story is getting out there. This is obvious in Ellie's story, but it should be obvious to everybody, but it isn't often, is that Jews have abortions. I think we often don't realize that Jews have abortions for all sorts of reasons. Some financial, some not prepared, some want to stay in school, some find out fetal anomalies, for all sorts of reasons. And we just, I think one of the ways in which we're lacking in this activism conversation is sometimes we think we're fighting for rights for others. And that is good. We should be fighting for rights for others. And I think it is a real moral deficiency if we don't realize that we also are having abortions. And I wish people knew more of that. There are so many actually brave Jews who have shared their abortion stories in the Jewish press. You can go to the Forward. You can go to Avital Chizek Goldschmidt collected a bunch of stories from Orthodox women several years ago. Jane Eisner wrote her own, or Jody Rudorin, wrote her own abortion story a couple years ago. So there are so many. If you Google Jews and abortion, you'll find all these stories. And it's so important to read them. The Jewish Women's Archive is collecting Jewish women's abortion stories right now. I'm doing my own research collecting Jewish women's abortion stories. I mean, these are the stories that need to get out there. It's part of the Shout Your Abortion movement that is part of normalizing and validating all of these experiences. And that is something that I wish we talked about more. Again, it's kind of obvious because the story it revolves around Ellie, but it's also, you know, a piece that I think we need to talk about more broadly.
Yep. Also, say the word abortion.
Say the word abortion.
Say the word abortion.
Absolutely. And actually, all of the legislators now who are trying to not even say the word abortion, they're trying not to say ban, they're saying national consensus. And, you know, one recently said, I won't even say the A word. It's not a dirty word. Abortion is just a word.
Yes, it's just a word.
Just a word.
I want to spend another minute on this film before we open it up. What is, I know that you spent a lot of time together, and you also, Ruth, you also surfaced a lot in the film. What is one thing also that you want to share that wasn't in the film that you want to share with the audience?
You know, we pretty much kind of knew, I think, that we wanted to do it as a short film. And I think that, you know, when you make a decision as filmmakers, you're like, okay, is this going to be a feature? Is this going to be a short? And I think we knew from the get-go. There was, ironically, I know, Ruth, you know, we mentioned Liz Cheney a minute ago. I mean, there was like literally a brief conversation where we all had, we were like, oh, should we turn this into a feature-length movie about moral courage and political courage? And we'd interview Liz Cheney, and we would do it. But we decided that this was best told in this kind of short, impactful way. So I don't think we left anything that we just really wanted it to be something that was very kind of potent and in its length. Yeah, I don't think there was, right?
We had thought about trying to reach out to Franz Leichter, who sadly passed away just this past year, and we didn't do that. And we had some debate about that, about trying to get in touch with him. But it wasn't really about the bill itself. It was more about George's, you know, political courage in that moment. So we felt like it wasn't really necessary. But that was one thing that we had discussed that we hadn't pursued. And
we had heard like through random people that you had been doing this class. We didn't know that going in, and I guess you had been doing it for quite some time, right?
Yeah, in different settings. I mean, it's just something because I spent 20 years of my life in elected office and had and saw other people with my own and their own run-ins with, like, which side do you take? I mean, I could tell you small examples from people I served with in New York City legislature where people made what I thought was the right decision, which was a decision against their obvious interests. And I just feel like it's exactly what I then discovered that Assemblyman Michaels had said, like, I'm putting my job on the line because there's no point in being elected if you don't do the right thing.
Thank
And
you.
a great quote from either Jim or Lee saying, like, 99.9% of the people can't do much with what they believe in. I would take that back a little bit because we could all do a lot to vote for a better House and Senate in 2024.
We were curious when we were making this, like, how often people, elected officials, feel that they could have a personal opinion versus, and then I know we touched on this at the very beginning of our talk here, but versus have their own take on something.
I don't want to be unfair to many of my colleagues, but I think it becomes something that people don't think about very much. Their views are shaped by who they are and what they know their constituency thinks, and they fall into that belief. And when you come on a moment, mine was, I'm not going to talk about them now, but I had some examples that were comparatively silly, and people would say to me, like, what does it matter? Just, like, do what's popular. And, like, that's not the point. But we don't talk enough about, just like we don't talk about abortion, we don't talk enough about what it means to hold elected office, what it means to actually vote your conscience. Those of you who remember Vito Marcantonio, that was the title of his autobiography was I Vote My Conscience.
Thank you. So I do want to make a little political plug, and that is for those of you who are registered to vote, should go out to vote. If we were in another state, not in New York, I would say make sure to call your elected officials to voice your opinion. And I will still say, call your elected officials and thank them for their support of abortion access. I remember when the Reproductive Health Act passed in January of 2019, there was a lot of upheaval and a lot of support, and New York is still one of the only states in the country that has unrestricted access to abortion health care. So you should. I don't live here. I actually live in Maryland that also has unrestricted access to abortion health care, and it's really important to thank your elected officials because that could go away also, just like that, if they don't hear from you.
Can I have one more
Yeah,
suggestion?
jump in.
Which is call your religious leaders if you have one.
Yep.
And ask, and first of all, make sure that they're talking about abortion in the way you want them to be talking about abortion. See if they need to understand something better about abortion, about Jews, about abortion. But also see what they're doing to help their clergy members in states like Florida and Texas and all these places where they need help getting people abortions. We used to have a clergy consultation service before abortion was legal, and there were Jews, rabbis among the clergy, these 1,500 clergy, who helped people get abortions across state lines. And we kind of need a new one of those. So see what your clergy are doing on this end.
I don't know personally, but I know of 2 rabbis who are about to resign their pulpits and move because they have trans children and they can't stay in the states where they're serving.
Yeah. Yes, and to that end, there are places, if you are clergy or if you are close enough to your clergy, to encourage them to get involved. NCJW has a clergy, Nancy, help me.
Rabbis for Repro.
Thank you, Rabbis for Repro.
Sorry, Nancy.
JOFA has the Rivka Isaac's plan, SAFE plan, which is actually named in memory of Paula Eiselt's grandmother, who herself had a traumatic abortion experience. I just want to say in full disclosure, Paula Eiselt, who produced Under God, is a board member at JOFA. Also full disclosure, I am on the board of Americans United Separation of Church and State, where Rachel was at the end of that film. So just if anybody's like, what's in it for Daphne?
Full disclosure, Rob and I worked on Under God, too.
There you go. There you go.
We've worked on all of Paula's films, yeah.
Well, then I guess it's okay that Paula's other film, one of her other films, Aftershock, which tracks the maternal health care crisis for Black and brown women in North America, was nominated for an Emmy, and I encourage all of you to watch that. I think it's streaming on Disney Plus. And I would love to open up questions in the audience.
Hi.
It's on.
Hi, I'm Nancy Kaufman, the former CEO of the National Council of Jewish Women, and one of the proudest things I used to be proud of is that we had a project that was called Courts Matter, and for 30 years we tried to explain the courts matter, and I now feel like, yeah, they matter, but they matter in the wrong way. So that's just one comment. The other comment is, in terms of votes matter, let's remember, as much as we like to excuse New York of a lot of things, it was thanks to New York that we have the House of Representatives that we have. So votes matter.
Votes matter.
But the third thing I want to talk about is what's really striking to me in Under God, and I was actually thrilled because I don't think there's been enough publicity around the states using RFRA and the fact that it can't be overturned by the Supreme Court. I don't think people realize that. And I think that's huge. And so my question is, if anyone knows this on that, how many states actually now have lawsuits pending? You said just 4 or 5?
It's either 4 or 5, yeah. I could list 4. I thought there was a 5th. I just can't remember.
So why not more? I'm just curious, why not more? And it's interesting because there was some controversy in the beginning, I remember, about whether that was the right strategy. And we should go that way. But it seems to me like the only strategy right now in terms of turning this around, at least at the state level. And I'd love any comments that either Michal or Ruth, I guess, would have about that, or Daphne.
I didn't do my full homework on this. I know that there are multiple cases in multiple states. So Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana. I want to say also that there are like other kind of gratuitous cases that are being thrown in also. So one of the cases that was being litigated in Indiana, I want to say, had to do with destruction or burial of fetal tissue, which was just like another burdensome thing on families and on mothers who were or pregnant people who were terminating pregnancy. So there's a lot of abuse of the legal system, and every day it almost feels like whack-a-mole, but whack-a-mole at like the 10th level, where like all the heads are popping up at the same time, and you're trying to smash them down. It's ongoing, and I've said this 100 times, maybe more, that for 50 years, the folks who have been trying to undermine Roe have been biding their time 50 years. We don't want it to take 50 years. People will die, and or experience really traumatic side effects and aftermath of abortion, but whether they take it into their own hands, the psychological trauma. And I will also say that when it comes to abortion access, we scream a lot about what happens in Texas, but we also need to care about what happens to the women in Teaneck. It's not just about legal access, it's also about destigmatizing and talking about it openly. So yes, the legal cases are so important as they seek to protect access to abortion and healthcare, but I think that there's many more conversations to be had about destigmatizing abortion, even miscarriage, that women just don't want to talk about. Everybody's entitled to their privacy, but the more we talk, the less shameful it is. Yep.
Not a question. I just wanted to bring up, we haven't talked about economic access for sure, which is really huge, no matter even where it's legal. And then also you just touched on it about people who are not seeking abortion, but just pregnancy care and miscarriage, that, all the horrible stories we've been hearing about women being forced to carry, fetuses that are not going to survive, or just putting themselves at major health risk.
Yeah, we call that termination for medical reasons. Folks should feel free to chime in. I want to say that there are abortion funds. If you want to know what else you can do, there are abortion funds that you can contribute to. You can volunteer at abortion clinics. One of the things that we know that's happening is that in states where there are fewer restrictions or no restrictions, that they're going to be seeing a lot more. We have been seeing a lot more women come in from crossing state lines, and as states uphold restrictions after 15 weeks or 16 weeks or 18 weeks, we're just going to be seeing a lot more second and third trimester abortions in states where there are no restrictions. And all of these, like everybody needs this support.
We have a margin, I think, of 3 votes in the Virginia state legislature. Virginia votes this year in odd years, not in even years. And Virginia now has an abortion clinic, which is serving all of the people in Tennessee where abortion's been made illegal and they're coming across the border.
So there are abortion funds, as Daphne said. There are federal abortion funds and state-level abortion funds that folks can access, and often also local abortion funds that folks can access if you just Google, the abortion funds. But also, so an abortion in the first trimester, surgical abortion can cost anywhere from $500 to $1,000 just for the procedure. That's not even counting if there are waitings and having to return and taking off work and childcare and all of those other factors. But more than half of our abortions now are medication abortions. And folks don't know this, but you can access medication abortion online. It can still be shipped through the mail, hopefully for a long time, but there are threats of the Comstock laws coming back into effect. And those pills, so if you can order through Aid Access. I'm just providing information for anybody who might need. And PlanCpills.org is another place where you can order abortion pills. Aid Access asks for $120 for the pills, and anybody can order them. I have sets in my home for anybody who might need, so you can get them, before you might need one. But you can also get them for free if you tell them that you have a financial need. So more and more people are getting abortions through medication abortion shipped online, which is why some of our statistics now about abortion are outdated or just unclear. But you should know there are financial alternatives for folks.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. Great. Okay, yeah. Hi, I'm Ellen Bender, and I am one of the co-founders of Markers for Democracy. We co-hosted a screening of the Jane's, the movie about the Jane Collective, so it was good to see that reference. I wanted to mention, as Ruth did, about the upcoming, there's an upcoming election in Ohio where they are actually going to vote on an issue where they're trying to raise the thresholds of votes necessary to be able to pass referendums, and they want to pass a pro-abortion referendum in November. So that's something that we are currently writing postcards and making calls into Ohio. We're also going to be active doing that in Virginia. And then in 2024 in New York, the ERA is going to be on the ballot, and that the Equal Rights Amendment in New York is going to codify Roe or abortion rights in our Constitution. And while again you may think New York, no big deal, we have the law, but if there's a nationwide 15-week abortion ban passed, we need it in our Constitution. So that's going to be on the ballot in 2024, and I hope that everyone here will be active in trying to advocate for it. So thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. We have one more.
We're going to do one more question.
One more question. Juliet's running.
Thank you all. It's just absolutely inspiring, I have to say. The reason why I'm here, right? My reproductive justice experience started when I was a camp counselor at Wells College, right below Auburn. I had a student who had a problem. We went away. The camp counselors went off to have a day to ourselves. I get back at night. She hadn't gone to the hospital. Where did I have to take her? To Auburn. Right? So she could have an IUD removed. And so it started with that. And so here I am today because, one, I didn't realize that Jewish women basically had this position in this whole reproductive rights thing. But I used Planned Parenthood. I remember when abortions were legal. I remember when women were dying in New York City. I remember my aunt used to be a woman who provided those services to women. But here we are today. And I was stunned when I heard the news about Iowa. They basically banned. I said, no, they have all lost their minds. And that we have to, and that's why I'm here today, because we really have to be inspired. We have to show the moral courage. and we can't back down.
And we got to be vigilant.
And we can't back down.
Thanks, B. So again, I want to thank my panelists, my co-panelists here. I want to thank all of you for coming. I want to thank Lilith. Again, if I want you all to leave here with thinking about something that you learned and something that you're going to do, because you will be saving lives, and that's everything. Thank you.
Folks, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you
Thank
to
you.
our moderator and to our panelists. Have a great night.
Oh, and decide.